Could you dance with me? Please, don't look back. Ava Johnson's voice barely rose above the music, but there was something in it that didn't belong in a place like this, something tight, something fraying at the edges. The man she had approached didn't answer right away. He simply looked at her, his expression unreadable under the soft amber lights of the nightclub, where crystal glasses shimmered and quiet conversations floated above the steady rhythm of jazz. Ava's hands were trembling, just slightly, the kind of tremor you could miss if you weren't paying attention. But he noticed. He noticed everything. The way her breath came just a little too fast. The way her eyes kept drifting past his shoulder, then snapping back like she was afraid of being caught. The way she stood too close for a stranger, not out of boldness, but necessity. Just dance, she whispered again, her fingers brushing his sleeve for a second before pulling back, like she'd already said too much. Around them, the evening carried on as if nothing had shifted. Waiters moved between tables with practiced ease, balancing trays of cocktails that cost more than Ava made in a night. Laughter rose from a group near the bar. A couple swayed slowly on the dance floor, lost in their own world. It was the kind of place where everything looked perfect from a distance. And that's exactly why no one noticed the way Ava's shoulders tensed when a man at the far end of the room leaned forward in his chair. He had been there all night. Sitting alone. Watching. Not in the obvious way, no, that would have been easier to ignore. His gaze was patient. Calculated. Like someone who had all the time in the world. Ava had seen him before. Once near the back exit. Another time across the street when she finished her shift. And now here, again, in a place he had no reason to be. 4 nights in a row. The same distance. The same smile that never quite reached his eyes. She hadn't said anything to her manager. What could she say? That a man was looking at her too long. In a place where men paid to look. No, this was different, but different didn't come with proof. It came with a feeling. The kind that sat in your chest. And refused to leave. The man in front of her finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, he set his glass down on the table without breaking eye contact. You don't usually ask strangers to dance, he said, his voice low, steady, carrying none of her urgency. Ava swallowed. I don't usually have to. That was all she gave him. No explanation. No story. Just the truth wrapped in restraint. For a brief moment, the music seemed to fade, not because it actually did, but because something else took its place. A shift in the air. The kind that happens when one person realizes something the rest of the room hasn't caught up to yet. He stood. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just enough to close the distance between them by half a step. Ava felt it immediately, the change. Not relief. Not yet. But something steadier than fear. Stay close, he said. Simple. Controlled. Like it wasn't a request. Ava nodded before she could stop herself. She didn't ask who he was. She didn't ask why he agreed. Because for the first time that night, the man across the room wasn't the only one watching. And somehow, that changed everything. The moment his hand settled lightly at her back, the world around them seemed to rearrange itself, not visibly, not dramatically, but in the subtle way tension shifts when something unseen takes control. Ava moved with him onto the dance floor, her steps uncertain at first, her mind still racing faster than the music allowed. She could feel her own heartbeat in her ears, loud and uneven, but his pace did not match her panic. It was slower, measured, almost deliberate, as if he was not dancing to the music at all, but to something deeper, something only he could hear. Do not look at him, he said quietly, his voice close enough that only she could catch it. Ava stiffened for half a second before forcing herself to follow his lead, her eyes lowering instead of searching. That alone told her everything she needed to know. He had already noticed. He had already understood. And somehow, that realization both steadied her and unsettled her even more. You saw him, she murmured, barely moving her lips. I saw you notice him, he replied. There was no judgment in his tone, no curiosity either. Just fact. The kind of certainty that did not ask questions because it already had answers. Around them, couples continued to sway, unaware of the quiet exchange unfolding in the middle of the floor. The band played on, the soft hum of a saxophone filling the room with something smooth and polished, a contrast so sharp it almost felt unreal. Ava followed his movements more easily now, her body beginning to sync with the rhythm, but her mind remained fixed on the presence she refused to acknowledge. She could still feel it, like a shadow pressing against her back. Watching. Waiting. He has been here before, she said, her voice steadier now, though her fingers tightened slightly against his sleeve. More than once. I know. The words landed heavier than she expected. Ava blinked, her breath catching just enough to break her rhythm for a step. He adjusted instantly, guiding her back without effort, without drawing attention. You know, she repeated, this time unable to keep the question out of her voice. For the first time, his gaze shifted, not to her, but past her shoulder, just briefly, just enough. And in that fraction of a second, something changed. Not in the room. In him. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there. The calm did not disappear. It sharpened. He does not belong here, he said. Not a guess. A conclusion. Ava felt a chill run through her, not from fear this time, but from the realization that whatever she had been sensing all night had just been confirmed by someone who did not speak lightly. She swallowed, forcing herself to stay present, to stay grounded in the movement of the dance. Then why is he still here? The question slipped out before she could stop it. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned her slightly, guiding her through a slow pivot that positioned her back toward the far end of the room, away from the line of sight she had been avoiding all night. It was a small adjustment, one no one else would notice. But Ava felt it. The intention behind it. Because, he said finally, his voice quieter now, almost thoughtful, he believes no one sees him. There was a pause, brief but heavy. Then, just as smoothly as before, he continued, and that is where he is wrong. Ava's grip tightened again, not out of panic, but out of something new, something she had not felt since the moment she walked into the room. Control. Not hers. But his. And for the first time that night, the shadow behind her did not feel as close as it had before. The music continued, smooth and uninterrupted, but something beneath it had shifted, something Ava could not name yet could clearly feel. His hand remained steady at her back, guiding without pressure, without hesitation, like he had already decided how this night would unfold. Ava followed, her steps now more certain, but her senses sharper than ever. She did not turn. She did not need to. The absence of that presence behind her was not complete, but it had changed, like a shadow forced to step back when light moves closer. What happens now? She asked quietly, her voice no longer trembling, but still careful, like someone testing ground that might give way. He did not answer right away. Instead, he adjusted their movement again, turning them slightly toward the center of the room where the light was warmer, brighter, where eyes naturally drifted but never lingered. It was not a hiding place. It was exposure. And somehow, that felt safer. Now, he said, his tone even, we let him make a mistake. Ava frowned slightly, the words settling in her mind slower than the music around them. A mistake, she repeated, barely above a whisper. People who believe they are invisible, he continued, always do. There was no arrogance in his voice. No dramatics. Just quiet certainty, like he had seen this pattern play out more times than she could imagine. Ava hesitated, then allowed herself a small breath. And if he does not, she asked. This time, there was the faintest pause. Not doubt. Consideration. He already has, he replied. Ava felt that again, that subtle shift, the same one she noticed earlier when his gaze had briefly moved past her shoulder. It was not fear. It was awareness. Focus sharpened into something precise. She followed his lead as he guided her into a slow turn, her back now angled toward the bar, her view opening just enough for her to catch reflections instead of direct lines of sight. And that was when she saw it. Not him directly. But the movement. A reflection in the mirrored wall behind the bar. The same man, no longer seated. Standing now. Closer. Not rushing. Not approaching outright. Just adjusting his position as if he had every right to be there. Watching without appearing to watch. Ava's breath caught, but only for a second. She steadied herself, forcing her expression to remain neutral, her steps aligned with the rhythm he maintained so effortlessly. "He is moving," she said under her breath. "I know." The response came instantly. No surprise. No reaction. Just confirmation. Ava swallowed, her fingers tightening again for a brief moment before she forced them to relax. "You said he made a mistake," she pressed, needing something more solid than instinct. His hand shifted slightly, not gripping, not pulling, just enough to guide her into another turn, one that placed her directly between him and the reflection she had been watching. Blocking her view. But not his. "He came closer," he said. "Closer means he thinks he is safe." Ava's eyes lifted to meet his for the first time since they stepped onto the floor. There was no fear there. No urgency. Just a calm so controlled it almost felt unreal. "And he is not?" she asked. For a brief moment, something flickered in his expression. Not anger. Not emotion. Something colder than both. Not anymore. The words settled between them, quiet but final. And in that moment, Ava realized something she had not understood before. She had thought she was asking for help. For protection. But what she had stepped into was something else entirely. Something far more controlled. Far more deliberate. The music played on. The room remained unchanged. But somewhere within it, unseen by everyone else, the balance had already shifted. The distance between them and the rest of the room seemed to shrink and expand at the same time, as if the space itself was adjusting to something no one else could perceive. Ava felt it in the way conversations near the dance floor softened, in the way a passing waiter hesitated for half a second before continuing on, in the way the air carried a tension too subtle to name but too present to ignore. His hand remained steady, his posture unchanged, yet everything around him seemed to orbit that stillness. Ava followed his lead, her steps now fully aligned with his, her breathing slower, more controlled, though her awareness sharpened with every second. She did not need to look for the man anymore. She could feel where he was. Not close enough to touch, but no longer distant enough to ignore. "He is waiting," she murmured, her voice quieter now, not from fear, but from understanding. "Yes," he replied, his tone unchanged. "He believes you will step away." Ava's eyes lowered briefly as she processed that. Step away. Back to the edge of the room. Back to where she had been before. Alone. Predictable. Easy. The thought settled in her chest, not as panic, but as clarity. "And if I do not?" she asked. This time, the answer came without delay. "Then he will have to change his plan." Ava let that sink in, her fingers relaxing at last, her shoulders easing into the rhythm of the music. For the first time that night, she was no longer reacting. She was part of something controlled. Something intentional. A slow turn brought her closer to him, their movement tightening just enough to draw less attention, to blend into the pattern of the other couples who drifted across the floor. But there was a difference. Their movement was not casual. It was precise. Ava noticed it now, the way he adjusted not just for the music, but for the space around them. The way he positioned her without making it obvious. The way his gaze never settled in one place for too long, yet missed nothing. "You have done this before," she said softly, more statement than question. A faint pause followed, barely noticeable, but enough. "Something like it," he answered. It was not a full admission. It did not need to be. Ava exhaled slowly, her mind catching up to what her instincts had already begun to accept. This was not coincidence. This was not luck. She had not just asked a stranger for help. She had stepped into the orbit of someone who understood control in a way she had never experienced. Across the room, the reflection shifted again. Ava caught it in the corner of her vision, the same figure adjusting, no longer pretending to be part of the background. There was a change now. Not retreat. Not quite. But hesitation. Small. Measured. Real. "He sees you," Ava said quietly. Yes. There was no denial. No deflection. Just acknowledgement. Ava's gaze lifted again, searching his face for something more, something that explained the certainty, the calm, the quiet authority that seemed to shape the room without effort. "Who are you?" she asked, the question finally breaking through everything she had been holding back. This time, he did not answer immediately. The music slowed, the rhythm stretching into something softer, more deliberate. He guided her through one final turn, positioning them at the very center of the floor where the light fell clean and uninterrupted. For a moment, everything aligned. The music. The movement. The silence beneath it all. Then, without raising his voice, without shifting his expression, he said, "Someone he should not have followed." The words were simple. But they carried weight. Not loud. Not threatening. Just final. Ava felt it settle in the space between them, and for the first time that night, the fear she had been carrying began to loosen its grip, replaced by something steadier, something grounded. Around them, the night continued as if nothing had changed. But in the quiet spaces between glances and movement, one truth had already taken hold. The man who had been watching was no longer the one in control. The music slowed into something softer, the kind of rhythm that made the entire room feel like it was holding its breath without realizing it. Ava felt it in the way her steps naturally drew closer to his, in the way the space around them seemed to widen even as the crowd pressed in. No one was watching them directly, yet no one interrupted their movement either, as if some quiet understanding had settled over the floor. His hand remained steady at her back, guiding but never forcing, present without demanding attention. Ava exhaled slowly, her pulse no longer racing, but her awareness sharper than it had ever been. She did not need to look for the man anymore. She could sense the hesitation now, like a shift in gravity somewhere just beyond her reach. "He is not coming closer," she said under her breath, almost surprised by her own observation. "No," he replied, his tone unchanged. "He is deciding whether to stay." Ava frowned slightly, her mind catching on that distinction. Not retreating. Not advancing. Waiting. Calculating. "And if he stays?" she asked. This time, the answer carried the faintest trace of something new. Not emotion. Not quite. But something firmer. "Then he accepts what follows." The words settled heavily, though they were spoken without force. Ava felt them more than she understood them, like stepping onto solid ground without knowing how deep the water had been before. She followed his lead as he guided her through another slow turn, their movement aligning perfectly with the music, effortless to anyone watching, deliberate to anyone who knew what to look for. And somewhere in that motion, Ava noticed something she had missed before. It was not him. Not directly. It was the room. A man near the bar straightened slightly, his posture shifting just enough to suggest awareness. A woman seated near the corner glanced up briefly, then returned to her drink, but not before her eyes flicked toward the same direction Ava had been avoiding all night. Even the waiter who had passed them earlier now moved with a different kind of precision, his path adjusted by inches that felt intentional rather than accidental. Ava's breath caught, but she kept her expression neutral, her step steady. They see him, she whispered. They see me, he corrected gently. Ava blinked, her gaze lifting to meet his again. For a moment, she searched for something more in his expression, something that explained the quiet shift she was beginning to understand. But there was nothing dramatic there. No signal. No command. Just calm. Controlled. Absolute. You did not call anyone, she said, the realization forming slowly. No, he replied. Then why, she hesitated, her voice lowering even further, why does it feel like the room changed? He did not answer immediately. Instead, he guided her into a final turn, one that brought them to a near standstill at the center of the floor, their movement slowing just enough to blend into the fading notes of the song. For a brief moment, everything aligned again. The music softened. The conversations dimmed. The light settled evenly across the room. Then he spoke, his voice quiet, but unmistakably clear. Because it did. Ava felt it then, fully, completely. Not fear. Not confusion. Understanding. Whatever had been watching her all night was no longer unseen. Not because she had exposed it. But because someone else had chosen to. Across the room, the figure shifted once more, no longer blending as easily into the background. Not panicked. Not rushed. But no longer invisible either. Ava did not turn. She did not need to. She already knew. The balance had changed. And this time, it was not going back. The final note of the song lingered in the air just a second longer than expected, like the room itself was hesitating before moving on. Ava felt it in the stillness that followed, in the way no one immediately stepped forward to claim the next dance, in the way conversations paused just slightly before resuming. His hand remained at her back for that extra beat, not holding her there, but not releasing her either. It was not hesitation. It was timing. Ava did not step away. She stayed exactly where she was, her breath steady now, her senses no longer overwhelmed but sharpened into something focused, something aware. What happens next? She asked quietly, her voice no longer carrying fear, but something closer to curiosity, to understanding. This time, he did not move right away. His gaze shifted past her shoulder again, not quickly, not sharply, but with the same measured awareness that had guided everything so far. And then, almost imperceptibly, he gave the smallest nod. Ava did not see who it was meant for. But she felt the effect. Across the room, movement changed. Not dramatic. Not sudden. But deliberate. The man who had been watching her all night adjusted again, this time not toward her, but away. A step. Then another. Casual to anyone not paying attention. Intentional to anyone who understood what they were seeing. Ava's breath slowed even further as she realized what was happening. He was leaving. Not hurried. Not forced. But leaving nonetheless. He is going, she said, her voice almost inaudible. Yes, he replied. Why? The question came naturally now, no longer wrapped in fear, but in the need to understand the pattern she had been pulled into. He turned his attention back to her fully for the first time since the music began, his expression unchanged, his presence as steady as before. Because he finally understood the room, he said. Ava frowned slightly, her mind tracing the meaning behind those words. The room, she repeated. He let the silence stretch for a moment, just long enough for the answer to settle before he spoke again. He thought he was watching alone. Ava's eyes widened slightly as the realization clicked into place. Not just him. The bartender. The waiter. The woman in the corner. None of them had intervened. None of them had spoken. But all of them had shifted. Aligned. Quietly. Without signal. Without question. But he was not, she finished softly. He gave the faintest acknowledgement, not quite a nod, not quite agreement, but enough. Around them, the room began to return to its natural rhythm. The band adjusted their instruments. A new melody started to form. Conversations picked up again, laughter returning as if nothing had ever changed. But Ava knew better now. She felt it in the absence of that pressure that had followed her all night. The space behind her was no longer occupied by something unseen. It was empty. For the first time since she stepped into the club, it truly felt empty. She let out a slow breath, one she had not realized she had been holding for hours. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, sincere, grounded in something deeper than relief. He studied her for a brief moment, not evaluating, not questioning, just observing. Then, without ceremony, without drawing attention, he stepped back half a pace, releasing the space between them. Not abandoning it. Simply returning it. "You handled yourself well," he said. Ava blinked, surprised by that. "I was terrified," she admitted quietly. "You stayed," he replied. The words were simple, but they carried weight, the kind that settled deeper than praise. Ava absorbed that, letting it anchor something inside her she had not noticed before. Strength. Not loud. Not obvious. But there. Around them, the music rose again, the night continuing as it always had. But Ava knew something had shifted, not just in the room, not just in the balance of power she had witnessed, but in herself. And as she looked at him one more time, standing there as if none of it had required effort, one thought settled quietly in her mind. She still did not know who he was. But she knew exactly what he was capable of. For a moment, neither of them moved, as if the space between them needed time to settle after everything that had just shifted. The music had already picked up again, livelier now, a new rhythm threading through the room as if the night had quietly reset itself. But Ava knew it had not. Not really. She felt it in the calm that had replaced the tension in her chest, in the absence of that invisible weight that had followed her step by step for days. She glanced toward the far side of the room, not searching, just confirming. The man was gone. No reflection. No shadow. No lingering presence pretending to belong. Just empty space where something had once felt too close. When she turned back, he was already stepping away, not abruptly, not dismissively, but with the same quiet control that had defined every movement he made. It was subtle, the way he returned distance between them, like someone who understood exactly how much space to give without making it feel like retreat. Ava watched him for a second longer than she intended, her mind catching up to the reality that the moment was ending. "Wait," she said, the word slipping out before she could reconsider it. He paused. Not fully turning, just enough to acknowledge her voice. Ava hesitated, not because she did not know what to ask, but because she was not sure how to ask it. There were too many questions, and none of them felt simple anymore. She started, then stopped, her gaze dropping briefly before she steadied herself. "I never got your name." The room seemed to quiet again in that small space between question and answer, even as the music carried on around them. He looked at her then, fully this time, his expression unchanged, his presence just as composed as before. For a moment, it felt like he might not answer at all. Like names were not something he gave easily. "Dominic," he said finally. Just that. No last name. No elaboration. Ava nodded slowly, letting it settle. "Ava," she replied, though she had not been asked. Something about the exchange felt necessary, like balance. He acknowledged it with the faintest inclination of his head, nothing more. Silence stretched for a second, not uncomfortable, but incomplete. Ava studied him, her curiosity no longer driven by fear, but by something deeper, something grounded in what she had just witnessed. "You knew," she said quietly. "Before I even said anything, you knew something was wrong." It was not an accusation. It was recognition. Dominic's gaze held hers, steady, unreadable. "You asked for help," he said. Ava frowned slightly, not satisfied with that answer. That is not the same thing. Another brief pause. Then, just as calmly, he added, it is when someone chooses to listen. The words lingered longer than she expected, settling into a place she had not known was open until now. Ava exhaled softly, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction more. Around them, the night moved forward, people laughing, glasses clinking, the band building toward another crescendo. Everything looked the same. But it did not feel the same. Will I see you again? She asked, the question quieter than the others, almost lost beneath the music. This time, there was no pause. No hesitation. Just a simple, measured response. That depends. Ava tilted her head slightly, waiting. On whether you need to, he finished. It was not an answer that promised anything. But it was not a dismissal either. Before she could respond, a voice cut gently through the space beside her. Ava, table 12 is asking for you. She turned instinctively, the familiar sound of her manager pulling her back into the world she knew, the one that existed before this night shifted everything. When she looked back, he had already stepped away, blending into the room not by disappearing, but by becoming just another presence among many. Except he was not. Ava knew that now. She watched him for one last moment, the calm, the control, the quiet authority that did not need to announce itself. And as she turned to return to her work, one thought stayed with her, clear and certain. Some people walked into a room and took up space. Others changed the entire room without anyone realizing how. And Dominic was the second kind. Ava moved through the room with practiced ease, her tray balanced steadily in one hand, her posture composed in a way that no longer came from habit alone but from something newly grounded inside her. The rhythm of the night returned to what it had always been, orders called out, glasses filled, laughter rising and falling like waves against polished marble and dim amber light. But for Ava, nothing felt quite the same. She approached table 12, offering a polite smile, her voice calm, measured, as she took their order without hesitation. No tremor. No distraction. Just presence. And yet, beneath that calm, her awareness lingered, not searching, not anxious, but attuned in a way she had never experienced before. She noticed the details now, the subtle shifts she might have ignored before. The way the bartender glanced toward the entrance every few minutes, not nervously, but attentively. The way the waiter near the bar adjusted his route without breaking stride, avoiding certain spaces as if guided by something unspoken. The way conversations near the center of the room flowed easily, untouched, while the edges carried a different kind of quiet, more deliberate, more controlled. Ava delivered drinks, nodded politely, and stepped away, her movement seamless, but her mind tracing the pattern beneath it all. She did not see Dominic. Not directly. But she knew he was still there. Somewhere within the room. Not watching her. Not hovering. Simply present. And somehow, that presence still shaped everything around it. As she returned to the bar, placing an empty tray down with care, her coworker leaned in slightly, her voice low but curious. What was that about? Ava blinked, momentarily pulled back into a simpler kind of question. What do you mean? She replied. Her coworker glanced toward the dance floor, then back at her. You do not just walk up to someone like that, she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. And whoever he was, the whole room felt it. Ava hesitated for a fraction of a second, not because she did not have an answer, but because the answer no longer felt simple enough to say out loud. I needed a dance, she said finally, her tone light, but her eyes steady. Her coworker studied her for a moment, as if deciding whether to push further, then simply nodded, accepting the answer for what it was. But Ava knew it was not the full truth. Not even close. She picked up another tray, turning back toward the floor, her gaze sweeping the room once more. And then she saw it. Not him. But the space where he stood. Near the far column, partially in shadow, speaking quietly with someone she did not recognize. There was no display, no raised voices, no dramatic gestures. Just a conversation. Calm. Controlled. But the man he spoke to stood differently, his posture straighter, his attention sharper, as if every word mattered more than it should. Ava watched for only a second before looking away, instinctively understanding that watching too long was not her place. But the image stayed with her. Not because of what was said, but because of what was not needed to be said. She moved back into her work, the night continuing around her, but now every step felt different. Not lighter. Not heavier. Just more certain. And somewhere in the back of her mind, one realization settled quietly into place. Power did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes, it moved through a room like a whisper. And once you noticed it, you could never unsee it. The night carried on as if nothing had happened, but Ava no longer moved through it the same way. Something in her had shifted, like she had seen behind the curtain and could no longer mistake the performance for truth. The music returned, smooth and elegant, wrapping the room in ease as guests laughed and talked, yet beneath it she now sensed a quieter rhythm, an unseen order guiding everything. She continued her work, serving, smiling, speaking calmly, but inside, she was steady, no longer questioning what she had felt. As the evening thinned, she found herself near the entrance, collecting empty glasses when the door opened, letting in a cool breath of night. She looked up, and saw him again. Not at the center, not drawing attention, just near the exit, composed, speaking briefly with the same man who had earlier shown tension, now at ease. A nod, and the man stepped aside. Then Dominic turned, his gaze passing across the room, until it met hers. No gesture. No signal. Just recognition. It lasted a second, but it was enough. He had not stayed to be seen. He had not acted for praise. He had simply done what needed to be done, and now he was leaving. Ava didn't move. Some moments were not meant to be held, only understood. The door opened again, and he stepped into the night, gone without a trace. She stood there a moment longer, the room returning around her, yet something remained within her. She set the glasses down gently, her mind clear. Respect was not demanded, it revealed itself in silence, in choices made without witness. She took a slow breath and returned to her work. But it was no longer just another night. Because in that quiet moment, she had learned what dignity looks like.